All right, go for it.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Where in the world you are, it's V the Guerrilla Economist coming to you live, and it is none other than London Paul. It's time for another edition of the Sirius Report. Folks, you can check him out on thesiriousreport.com as well as the Sirius Report on Twitter. And guys, I recommend this. Here's what I recommend. Get on the special member exclusive service that London Paul has on the Sirius Report. That's SIRUIS Sirius Report. Check out his special member services for less than the price of a latte at Starbucks. You can be the forefront of geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic information. We here at Rogue Money are huge fans of his work. And honestly, the amount of emails that come in from people stating how much they love London Paul and the Sirius Report is tremendous. So do yourself a favor, do yourself a service. Go to thesiriusreport.com and subscribe. With that being said, London Paul, how goes thou, sir?
Well, good morning to you, and good morning to an afternoon and evening to everyone else listening. Yeah, fine, thanks. And yourself?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm just recovering from the extravaganza that was Thanksgiving and then Black Friday, and now it's Cyber Monday. And while it's getting lighter and lighter, Paul, what can I say?
Yeah, well, it's spread over here. I mean, we have sales. Mind you, we have sales pretty much 365 days a year, but they've sort of caught on with Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and the sales have got even more ridiculous. I mean, they're practically giving stuff away.
Yeah.
But it's a sure sign of the many things we've spoken about, the failing retail sector. I mean, it's not just what happens in the high street, it's online as well. There's this desperation to claw any business they can, and they'll do anything just to make a few cents or pennies in the pound or the dollar of profit because they're that desperate to clear stock.
Oh, absolutely, man.
But the economy's wonderful, of course. You know, it's never been better.
Well, yeah, it's never been better, Paul. I mean, after all, the unemployment rate is below 4% at this point. I think it's probably like 2% right now unemployed. It's incredible, and the stock market is at an all-time high, and there's a chicken in every pot and a car, multiple cars in every garage, Paul. So good times are here again, right?
Well, yeah. Well, it's like actually the stock in the last week, global stocks market cap value went up over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
It's now at around $95 trillion.
I love it. I love it. I love it. It's just
driven by all this wonderful, solid global economic data, and I mean, it's just we know it's all nonsense, but it's incredible how many people believe it reflects true economic value and rather than the illusion. But anyway, we digress.
Yeah, that's the scary part. That's the scary part right there. It's how many people believe it, and the stock market's doing great. I mean, these are people who haven't spent 5 minutes looking at real metrics, and now all of a sudden they're experts at how high the Dow goes.
Yeah.
Never ceases to amaze.
But yeah, so I think we'll start a bit with talking about Saudi and in general.
Yeah. That's always an interesting topic nowadays.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, with the thing with Mohammed bin Salman, who's the Crown Prince, who we'll call MBS from now on. He was given very, very bad advice with respect to Yemen and Qatar, and with respect to Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon. I mean, the fact he's come out and called the supreme leader of Iran the new Hitler of the Middle East, to put it diplomatically, was a very, very unwise comment to make. But what is kind of interesting is if you look at now what he's actually trying to find a way to get out of the Yemen situation, and also Qatar. But in in Yemen itself, setting aside that you mentioned the humanitarian crisis, which is 10 times worse than anything that we realize it is. But the whole war in Yemen's beginning to fall apart because you've got Saudi-backed Yemeni fighters who are starting to actually leave their ranks because they fear that the locals will push back from the Yemeni population because of all the unpopular bombing campaigns and also, as you said, all the humanitarian crisis. You've also got Saudi proxy fighters now at war with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, so effectively there's these coalitions that now are split right down the middle. Oman are starting to sort of have influence in the region that's going to fragment the Saudi coalition even further. And then there's also the sheikhs and scholars who rejected the UAE leadership with regards to Yemen. And you've got to also remember that the UAE has a huge amount of influence in what's going on in Yemen. And the UAE were the ones who actually talked MBS into going into Yemen in the first place. Well, we know exactly who the UAE's backers are, and this is all cabal just trying to stoke tensions in the region. But these sheikhs and scholars who rejected this UAE leadership have been killed or targeted by assassination attempts. So really, in essence, the Saudi war in Yemen is going to come to a close. Now, from MBS's point of view, he really needs a way to get out of it. I mean, yes, what he did was ridiculous to ever go into Yemen in the first place. But there needs to be a way to extricate themselves from that. The same with Qatar. And as we said, this whole issue to do with Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon. However, lately you would suggest, or from my perspective, that his chances of succeeding what he's doing with this purge in Saudi and looking to create this moderate Islamic state, which he is trying to do, although obviously some of the foreign policy decisions prior to this have been very detrimental. But lately, you'd think his chances of succeeding are reducing, and if it drops any more, the risk is he's going to be finished, and then the House of Saud will collapse, as was long predicted that it could happen. Ironically, until he came on the scene and started to do the things he'd done, no matter how unpopular it might seem with people, and certainly it is proved to be very unpopular with numerous people around the world who construe it as being that he's actually, I have people saying he's a Zionist stooge. Well, no, he's not a Zionist stooge. That's not the case. However, the fact is that with regards to Israel and the region, they've now played their hand, because we know for decades Israel and Saudi Arabia have had this, quote unquote relationship, and now they're publicly admitting it. And they're actually trying to almost, in a sense, suck up to openly to the fact they have this relationship with Saudi. That's a sort of sure sign of complete weakness on the part of the Israelis. In terms of internally, it now seems, and from somebody who's made me aware of this, because it's obviously quite hard to understand exactly what goes on in Saudi, but by all accounts, he hasn't lost control. This is MBS of the National Guard. He's contained the clerics who were always a problem, and the regular military remains under his control. Now they're kind of the pillars of the House of Saud, and provided you have the support or control of that, and generally you have a degree of stability in terms of leadership. And MBS has also made it clear that any opposition from US-backed royals won't be accepted. Hence why a lot of them are still in the Carlton. Ironically, I wasn't aware. I thought they were just keeping them sleeping on the floor on mattresses as some kind of punishment. But by all accounts, the reason they're sleeping on the floor is because they can't pay their own hotel bills because they've had their bank accounts frozen. If they could find a way of paying, they can stay in rooms, but because they can't, they're making them sleep in the lobbies on beds. Sounds incredible, but it's actually supposed to be true. Now, what ultimately matters from Saudi's perspective is the Chinese support. And we know there's the petro-yuan. We know the Russian involvement with King Salman going to Moscow. And if China continues to play its hand openly, then MBS is going nowhere. But it's rather like what we said with Trump and the US. And it's the same with any nation. China's very clear now on the world stage. They want a multipolar world. They want everyone to have an opportunity to have prosperity, wealth, and for their people. And people say, well, that's just nonsense. No, that is what they truly aspire to. Any nation who gets in the way of that will be crushed. And that's their viewpoint now. So Saudi has a real good opportunity to turn over a new leaf, have a completely different nation with Chinese largely, but also some Russian support. But if they don't play ball, then the Chinese will just wash the hands of Saudi and Saudi will collapse. With regards to Lebanon, Saudi is not going to do anything about Lebanon. Just look at geographically, look at the map of the Middle East. How exactly are they going to do anything to Lebanon? They can't do it. Iran isn't a threat, despite all the hot air rhetoric. Iran's got no interest in threatening Saudi Arabia. I mean, Hezbollah and Iran are sitting very pretty. We've seen the rebirth of Persia. Hezbollah is very popular inside Lebanon, contrary to people's belief. And also, they're not going to stay in Syria and Iraq. They're already talking about leaving Iraq at some point, and they'll do likewise with Syria. This is just Western hot air rhetoric, and also the Israelis trying to make out Hezbollah is going to threaten the Middle East, and therefore, by implication, so is Iran. So that's not the case. So the situation in Saudis is still a bit tenuous. I'm not as concerned that there's a risk of some sort of civil war in Lebanon happening anymore either. I wouldn't rule anything out at this stage, but it looks internally that there's some stability, for one, in inverted commas, with regards to MBS and what he's trying to do. But what he does in terms of foreign policy, it will largely dictate how Chinese support goes forward. And if China continues to maintain support and backstops Saudi, then the House of Saud will survive. But I think there's many concessions that will have to be made for China to keep that support, and that includes getting out of Yemen and resolving the problem, stopping the Qatar blockade, stopping this ridiculous rhetoric towards Iran, Hezbollah, not allowing a civil war to occur in Lebanon, etc. The list goes on and on. But that, I think, is where we currently are in terms of Saudi. But as ever, these pictures can change very, very quickly, and we shouldn't dismiss anything. But compared to when it all broke and the Lebanese Prime Minister left, who's now actually gone back on his word and hasn't resigned, and has now said, well, I'm having a period of reflection, which probably means he's never going to resign, and he hopes that that sort of news will die a death and no one will ever talk about it again. But the question is, why did he go back and basically say, well, no, I'm not resigning now. I'm going to seek counsel with the Lebanese government, precisely because the Saudis are not going to do anything about Lebanon. It was another trap that was set for them, and they've learned that lesson. The question is, are they going to learn the lessons with regards to Iran and Yemen and Qatar, which were all traps set by UAE conduits who advises MBS, and unfortunately he fell for them, much as a lot of nations in the Middle East did for decades. They're just pawns in a cabal game to be used as tools and toys to play various games to further the aims of the cabal. And of course, we know what happens when nations don't, such as Syria. But MBS needs to come to that realization, and pretty quickly, because otherwise Chinese support will wane, and then the consequences for the House of Saud and himself will be pretty dire.
Yeah, I had a couple questions real quick for you, Paul, in regards to the entire side. There's some reporting coming out of the U.S. in regards to Blackwater. I know that they have a new name. I apologize, I can't remember the name of the new company.
It's called Academy.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Being involved with torture and that information. Is there any validation of that?
I've heard the same story. I don't know for definite. What I did hear was there was some belief that, there was, some of the people who've been sort of arrested and had their assets frozen were tortured. I think that's public knowledge. Who exactly were doing it, I can't say, and I can't say whether it was that particular organization or not were involved, but certainly there was supposed to be some US mercenaries, in inverted commas, who were in the torture process, which frankly has been, whatever these people have done, is you just cannot do that to people. And there is a lot of suggestion that's gone on, but I can't verify that for absolute certainty. No one said to me it's definitely happened, although I've had suggestions that it's pretty likely it's happened, but in terms of who's involved, I couldn't say.
Yeah, there's a whole mess of these private contractors from XE. They renamed themselves to Academy, previously known as Blackwater, to Bechtel, to Halliburton. The list goes, G4S. The list goes on and on and on. It's quite insane. So it could have been from anyone. We've heard about mercenaries roasting kids on a fire in certain African countries. So it doesn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, there is horrendous stories going back for many years of these, as you say, the kind of atrocities happening.
Yeah.
But there's also rendition camps dotted around European nations with pretty, and this has been polite, unsavory things going on in those nations. Poland was one example that got outed for having so-called CIA rendition camps, for want of a better word, and there should certainly be a more stronger word than that. So it happens all over the world. To what extent this is happening in any particular place is very hard to quantify, but maybe one day the truth and reality of this will come out. But it's certainly a worldwide problem and has been for many, many decades.
Right. Exactly. Well, continue on, Paul. So what else is going on your radar?
Well, I think we have to. You mentioned it because I listened in early. We've got to talk about Merkel.
Yeah.
Because there's this incredible situation where obviously Merkel won the election with a very much reduced majority, tried to form this coalition government, and basically it collapsed because there was no agreement. We talked about this last week, but the developments are that she was talking about having another sort of snap election in Germany. And that kind of went quiet. And now this is the astonishing development. She's now proposing, or is in the process now, maybe today, of holding talks with Martin Schulz's SPD party with regards to a coalition. Now, this shows how desperate Merkel is, because ideologically there is no synergy between these two political parties. It's like the Democrats. I mean, okay, we know party politics is an illusion, but let's just, for the sake of the discussion, play along with the illusion. It's a bit like the Republicans and the Democrats deciding to form a government, or in this country, the Labour and Conservatives forming a coalition government. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. I mean, in essence, it's really just this farcical marriage of convenience to pacify the capitalists. Now, what's happened is Merkel's ratings are starting to collapse in German polls. The majority of the Germans, I think it's about 55 to 60%, don't want her to run as a candidate for chancellor anymore. And only 38, I think it was 38% said they would support a renewed candidacy of her as being as chancellor. Only 3/4 of her own coalition government previously are now in support of her. I think it's about 50% of the Greens, and the FDP party is about 30% supporting it. And unsurprisingly, this alternative for Germany, who's 90% wanted to step down. The reality of all this is Merkel is incredibly weak and vulnerable now. If she calls another snap election, she could likely end up out of government in totality. If she tries to form this coalition with Schulz, you can guarantee it will be universally loathed by the German people. And the fact is that the SPD, which is the Social Democrats, which is leaders this Martin Schulz guy, who was obviously in the European Union, the support for his party continues to drop. And it wasn't that great. I mean, I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head of what happened in the recent election, but the support for his party is below 20% now.
Yeah.
So the reality is that her chance of remaining chancellor are diminishing by the day. I mean, the general election result and her inability to form a coalition government really, in essence, means that her reign as chancellor is all but over, irrespective of what subsequently happens. And the truth is, another election could see Merkel's end in politics in totality being a reality. And this is a great sign. People often say, well, we need to remove these people from office. We need to, there needs to be some forcible changes. You don't need to in this world anymore. The people in nations like Germany are waking up to the reality. Okay, there's a long way to go, but Merkel's popularity is falling off a cliff edge. Her ability to form a government. I mean, what happens if she wins another election by a wafer thin, majority, and then tries to form a coalition? It will fail again. If she tries to form this government with Schulz, it will be an utter disaster, and the coalition will probably last a matter of months, if that, and then there'll be another election. But it's all an indication. You just let these people like Merkel fall on their own sword, and they'll destroy themselves in the process, because the one thing that the German people, well, there's two things they despise about her leadership. One was the whole immigration policy. And two, it's the sanctions against Russia, because the immigration policy has caused mayhem economically, politically, and socially in Germany, as it has in other European nations. But also the sanctions on Russia, as we've said many times before, have destroyed the German economy in far greater ways than it's impacted on the Russian economy. And commerce, trade, law just wants an end to it. And of course, privately, there's, as we said, behind the scenes, there is a move amongst a number of European nations, including Germany, obviously, there's Holland, Austria, and Finland, to form this new European Union, which eventually will integrate Russia into it. That's going on and is ongoing and still happening. There's a lot of dissension in Germany, and these people like Merkel will just end up destroying themselves. And just let them get on with it, because every move they make is causing more and more damage. And for her desperately to seek a coalition with Schultz and the SPD is just an indication of just how weak, how vulnerable, and how her support is fallen off a cliff edge. Yeah. And she might desperately try to cling on to power. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. If she forms a coalition, it will fail. If she gets re-elected, it won't work again. It doesn't matter anymore. These people are becoming largely irrelevant as the whole multipolar new paradigm unfolds. And what's happened in the recent elections with regards to Merkel proves that point, I think, rather eloquently.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching gears real quick, Benjamin Netanyahu over in Israel. I know he's on a knife's edge as we speak. Any chance that we can see some major reform and changes to the Israeli political system, or is it simply just business as usual over there?
Well, I know someone who gives me a lot of feedback as to, and they have a very balanced, very sort of sensible view of affairs inside Israel politically, and they told me probably 18 months to 2 years ago there was a move to oust Netanyahu, and you'd increasingly see the likelihood of eventually be indicted. Now, that is becoming more and more a distinct possibility. Mm-hmm. However, from their concern is that removing Netanyahu isn't necessarily, or probably won't result in the end of the cabal effectively holding sway in Israel. Because their fear is, if you get rid of Netanyahu, you're just going to get someone else in who will be exactly the same problem they currently have. However, their long-term belief, and this is mine, is that we will see significant changes with regards to Israel. I think certainly Trump's position with regards to Netanyahu and Tel Aviv is rapidly changing, particularly with respect to the issues over Palestine, which I'm not going to go into masses of detail because I covered this off in Friday's podcast for our subscribers. But yeah, I think ultimately we will see big changes. But the one thing that Israel is suffering, it's certainly getting weaker and it's becoming more isolated. I mean, the Russians aren't going to tolerate Israeli interference with Iran or with Hezbollah or Lebanon, and that's been made abundantly clear. I mean, in terms of Palestine, I think there is some degree of softening inside Tel Aviv, but I mean, actions speak louder than words, and we have to see some concrete evidence of that. But I don't think removing Netanyahu is going to be the answer. I mean, you can never say maybe he'll go and there'll be this seismic change, and it is possible. But as things stand, from what I've been told, it's very unlikely we're going to see this seismic change happen then. But I think at some point you will see a seismic change, like every other nation that's had the cabal having an undue influence over them, will certainly occur in Israel too. But I'm not expecting the removal of Netanyahu to be this kind of seismic change at that point. But you never know. It just depends. But the move to get rid of him has been going on for quite a long time, which kind of suggests that it's probably just cabal, feasting on cabal, and one element of that, sort of a lot to trying to remove Netanyahu. And it could be that Netanyahu's now considered persona non grata and he served his purpose and he's actually ineffective anymore. So we need to put someone else in to create more pressure and stoke tensions up with the likes of Iran. Because, to be honest, despite all the rhetoric coming out of Saudi, Israel's response, they have made comment, but it's been pretty muted. It's not the kind of high octane rhetoric you would have expected, because Israel is weak and it is in no position to go to war. I mean, it failed in 2006 with Lebanon. It's not going to start trying to fight another war with Hezbollah, because things were bad enough 11 years ago. It's going to be even worse for them now. So, yeah, it's always interesting to watch what's going on with Netanyahu, but I don't think it's necessarily going to lead to what people hope in the short term. But I think, obviously, in the long term, yes, it will. We'll see massive changes with regards to to Israel's relationship with its neighbors and its position on the world stage.
Very well said. Also, back to what you were saying with the relation to the Middle East, you got Palestine. I don't know if you covered this because I had to step out for a second while CJ was handling the questions. But Lebanon, what's your take with what's going on in Lebanon? You got Hariri, he's back in Lebanon. What's your take on that? And I personally think this whole Saudi-Israeli pipe dream of getting into a war with Hezbollah and Lebanon is really starting to fall apart, Paul. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I basically said in a roundabout way exactly what you've just said. I mean, from my perspective, the Saudis are not going to do anything with regards to Lebanon. You only have to look at the map to realise that. Just geographically, it's not possible, and there is no way that Saudi is going to just go and start a war with Lebanon.
Yeah,
and the Israelis are now in no position to want to start a war with Lebanon for the reasons we've just said. So no, I absolutely agree. The wheels are starting to fall off, and Hariri's the fact he went back to Lebanon and basically, as I said just earlier, he's saying, well, actually, I'm not really going to resign now, and it's all gone a bit quiet because he's had discussions with the Lebanese government, and the biggest thing was that people of his own political persuasion turned on him and said, why have you resigned? This has got nothing to do with Hezbollah. So fortunately, internally, within Lebanon and the people and the government, they didn't fall for this nonsense. And I think Hariri's gone back and basically had to eat humble pie and go, well, that was a bit of a ridiculous thing to do. And as you say, I think the wheels have fallen off. But never say never. That spectre of a false flag, which we've discussed before, gone away in totality, and that could always be used as a reason. And the question then is, will nations such as Saudi fall for it? Will nations such as as a result, will Lebanon also get dragged into something because of it? You can never say never, but increasingly, yeah, the risk has certainly subsided quite substantially as things stand today.
excellent. Got it. So what else is on your radar, Paul?
Well, you mentioned about the whole BRICS gold thing. I'll talk a bit about gold and silver, and in the context of, and also this idea. We've said it before. There is going to be a big future for gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. There's none of this exclusion, this kind of policy that if you have cryptos, gold and silver can't exist, and vice versa. They'll live in perfect harmony together. But the BRICS development, where they're saying they're going to create this unified system of gold trade, is something that I can't remember when I first talked about it quite a few years ago, that this would start to come to pass. I mean, the trade system based in London, which is the LBMA and the COMEX, is becoming less relevant because these new trade hubs are starting to emerge, such as the Shanghai Gold Exchange. We know that Russia's buying huge amounts of gold. China is and continues to buy huge amounts of gold. They've both got, well, China's got around 40,000 tons and Russia's got even more than that. They're not buying this for no good reason. So people saying, well, actually, there's no point owning gold and silver because the value hasn't gone up. Well, no, it hasn't. And yes, the value of Bitcoin continues to accelerate, and it's likely to keep going north and north and north. That is, I don't think there's any doubt about it. But what they don't also explain is the ruthless manipulation of gold and silver prices. There has been tens of hundreds of billions of dollars of paper contracts dumped into the market to suppress the price. That's the reason why you're not seeing the price movement. But at some point, of course, the paper market will eviscerate, and that will be the end of the controlling price. Then gold and silver will start to move north. Where's it going to? I have theories on that, but I don't get dragged into price speculation. But I see it considerably north of where it is. Now in terms of the Bank of Russia, there's this idea they've signed this memorandum on the development of bilateral gold trade with China. Now that's already in existence. That's working already. The plans to roll it out in 2018, yes, that's correct, but it's already tested, fully operational, and it will have obviously trade and clear links to be established. Gold traders can decide where they want to purchase gold in this whole BRICS arrangement. And the trade links will enable market participants to make these deals on international exchanges via this central counterparty. So it's a big plus for gold. But what this ultimately leads to is what we referred to in the past as the gold trade note. And hence why the petrodollar is going to be gold backed. So, for example, with a gold trade note, we've said this way, but I might have even said it on the first show we ever did, but it's worth mentioning it again that if a large corporation in the West wants to trade with China, for example, the corporation will need to post gold as collateral, which can be warehoused, for example, in the new BRICS Development Bank. Now, a corporation can then borrow 10 times, say, what they've posted against this. Any reason they default on the trade, then the gold, they will lose a proportion of the gold to settle the trade. This is the basis of this gold trade note, and what the BRICS are doing effectively is rolling that out. But eventually, gold trade notes will exist all over the world. So the East will need a large supply of gold themselves to fulfill their end of the deal, which they will do. It's why treasury bonds are being dumped in favor of gold by countless nations. Never fall for the illusion of all these US treasuries are being bought up. The US treasuries are being bought up by the Exchange Stabilization Fund when bond auctions fail.
Yep.
And that's why all these treasuries end up in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein and nations and Ireland with incredibly bulging treasury holdings. It's just all an illusion.
Yeah.
So they obviously, for example, the new development bank will have several thousands of tons of gold, so they can have this continued trade initially amongst the BRICS nations, but then with other nations. So obviously the West will need to post gold trade notes to enable imports. That raises the interesting question as to what happens with the US because they don't have any gold. They need a devalued dollar, and that's certainly coming down the track, and we've said that before. So the basis is we have gold-backed currencies. We know Russia and China are going to do that. Then there's the challenge that you've got to internationally convert held dollars into another currency, there's a process already in place to do that at the appropriate time. And obviously, when the dollar's phased out, you need to continue export-import supply chain. It's very important. Once again, people say just get rid of the dollar. You can't just get rid of the dollar because you cause the whole global trade system to collapse.
Yeah.
That's not a great idea.
Exactly.
The gold trade note will avoid inventory supply issues. Now, I'm not decrying Bitcoin or any current cryptocurrencies. They will exist and they will evolve all by themselves, and what will happen to them will happen to them. This is where the asset-backed cryptocurrencies come in. Now, everyone doesn't like this because they say it's centralized control. They're going to hasten the death of paper markets. And yes, if people want to cash in cryptos and own the gold and silver by these asset-backed cryptos, they can do that. The great thing is on blockchain, the gold and silver will be fully audited. It will have global adoption.
Yeah.
It will be used for gold trade notes and settlement. So whether people like it or not, these asset-backed cryptocurrencies with global adoption are an absolute certainty. They are coming down the track. Russia will do it, China will do it, and eventually other nations likewise will adopt them. And they will be used in a very, very productive way, which will allow nations to trade. They will also be fully audited. There won't be any idea that people can hold gold and silver and pretend to hold it as opposed to having just paper contract. So it's good for the gold and silver market. So it has the additional bonus that it will also create the death, as we said, of the paper markets. But this adoption means it will be used in trade and for trade settlement. Does it mean asset-backed cryptocurrencies are going to be used by the average person in the street? Probably eventually, because they will have a degree of stability. I mean, someone said to me recently, why don't you, for your podcast subscription services, use cryptocurrencies? And my exact words to them was, I don't have a problem with cryptocurrencies. It's just too volatile. What am I supposed to charge people? I mean, it fluctuates so much. We've seen massive gains on Bitcoin over the weekend. What am I suddenly supposed to do with my price? One day I'm charging people there. I might not forget, and then I'm charging someone quadruple the price a matter of weeks later because I forgot to change the price. It's very difficult. I mean, I'd like to be able to do it, but it lacks stability at this point. That's why I don't want to adopt it. It's not that I have a problem with cryptocurrencies or I have a problem with Bitcoin. I don't. ultimately, Bitcoin, I don't know what price it will go to. It could go ridiculously north of where it is. I mean, who knows where it will go to? My only concern is eventually it will reach a price where it will price itself out the market. It will get so high. My concern then is who are the people who've been hanging on to enormous quantities of this, who may then dump them into the market, which will cause massive volatility and crash the price. And that is my concern. It doesn't mean it will crash the price and destroy Bitcoin, but there is a risk because will come a point where if it gets to some ridiculously high level, there is a risk it will implode the market because the demand and supply will just go completely out of kilter. Because let's say, and I'm not saying it will, but say it went to $500,000 a coin, and there is people who suggest that, or 100,000. How are people going to trade in that? Who's going to buy it? And when the market starts to drop, those people with big holdings, and there are people already in terms of the banks, etc., who are starting to buy into this. When it reaches that point, they'll dump their holdings because they're not holding it. They're holding it purely for fiat purposes, most of these, because they don't buy into the whole cryptocurrency, because the cryptocurrency itself is the one thing they fear. So why would they buy into things that they fear? They buy into it because they want to make massive profit. They think the wheels start to fall off because there isn't the demand anymore. They don't dump them, and if they dump them in large quantities, the risk is it can cause a carnage, and then in the ensuing confusion, people will get very frightened and dump them, and it can precipitate a big crash in the price. And I hope it doesn't happen. That is just a fear I have. And that doesn't mean people shouldn't buy into it, because we've seen what's happened to Bitcoin. It's gone through the roof. I mean, it went at 17% over the weekend.
Yep.
There is massive interest in it, and we know the reasons why there's huge interest, and a lot of it is coming out the Far East. Admittedly, that's true. It hasn't really gripped a huge amount of people. Imagine if it did have a lot more interest globally, then that's going to create a lot more interest and stimulate the price movement further north. So it certainly has a future. I'm just not sure long term what that future will be. What I do know is, and I understand, is the asset-backed cryptocurrencies. That's the one area I'm very comfortable with, and I understand it, and I know what's coming. But that doesn't mean that other cryptocurrencies won't survive and won't flourish in the process, and they'll probably evolve and change accordingly. And you get forks in cryptocurrencies, which, for that very reason, because it's part of an evolutionary process. But overall, my point is, gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies and blockchain are all here to stay. They all have a huge, important role in the future. And one is not to be eliminated to the detriment of the other. That simply isn't going to happen. So people saying, I'm dumping all my gold and silver and buying cryptocurrencies because there's no future in gold and silver, that simply isn't the case. China and Russia haven't done what they've done. They're not launching gold-backed cryptocurrencies. They're not launching gold-backed currency. And we're not going back to sound money and the death of fiat money, because gold and silver have no future. It's actually completely to the contrary.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is that fear with, Bitcoin going up that high. But I mean, the beautiful thing with the system is, it can be divisible up to 1/100th of a penny. So that's a good thing. So there is some leeway there. But
yeah, I don't. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not predicting major problems in the near future.
I think it will go through a correction.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it just depends. My concern is the people out there who, the ones who are calling it a fraud and then actually were investing in it. What's their game? Because ultimately, we know that the capitalists don't want cryptocurrencies. It's the last thing they want, because they know it will ultimately destroy the financial system. Although, having said that, and I get a lot of people leverage at me, well, the cabal can just keep printing money, and the Exchange Stabilization Fund has an enormous black hole of huge amounts of money which finance black ops, which finances failed bond auctions, which finances all manner of things. But here's the point. It doesn't matter. Give them $100 trillion. Give them 1,000 billion trillion dollars. It makes no difference, because when the reset happens, the US dollar complex is going to be eviscerated. So they can have all the money they like. At that point, it'll all be worthless, and they'll have no money and no power. That's the whole basis of what the financial reset's about. All this thing about RV and this currency is going to be worth a fortune and that currency is going to be worth a fortune is all a misnomer. What the reset's all about, it's the end of the US or fiat dollar complex. It's the birth of sound money. Sound money is backed by gold, it'll be backed by silver, possibly backed by other assets too. That's what the financial reset's all about. And in part of that, the big part of the reset is because cryptocurrencies and blockchain has a massive future. I mean, it's universal adoption in probably 5 years from now, maybe even sooner. We could be having a conversation about the incredible adoption in every sphere of our life, which of course cryptocurrencies will and blockchain will most certainly be part of. So I'm very much enthusiastic about all three of them. I don't see it to the detriment. Just because I'm a little bit concerned about Bitcoin from my own perspective, that's just my perspective. That doesn't make it a bad investment. And people who have invested are already sitting on huge profits. So that's a good investment for them, and they've got every reason to be happy and confident about future, right? But that's not because I see it detrimental. It's just my own perspective. I'm kind of just interested in different things, and ultimately, for me, the asset-backed cryptocurrency is something that interests me more. But time will tell if I'm proved to be wrong or right in my assessment of that. But I'm very confident about that. But I'm very confident in general, and I do follow other cryptocurrencies. I'm interested in what's going on in the markets and seeing how they play out, and because it is very much the evolution of an aspect that will completely change the whole financial paradigm globally. Of that, there is no doubt.
Absolutely correct, man. Absolutely correct. And that's what people need to understand is that we're heading towards a world where cryptos and metals, all of these can exist harmoniously and work together for the betterment of humanity. And I love what you said. Gold is going on the blockchain because it's the only way to accurately audit the gold. And that's something that the Wall Street and London banksters don't want.
Oh, absolutely. They're terrified of that. Same with silver for exactly the same reason. It's a beautiful way of just making sure that, and if someone buys 1 ounce equivalent of gold, and I mean, the question is, I mean, people will say, well, how exactly can I trade in my cryptocurrency for gold or silver if they want to do that? Well, there'll have to be some limits because you can't, otherwise people couldn't be, hang on, we're just going to sell you, this much gold or silver. So there'll be a limit on it. But that will be part of the process, and it gives confidence in terms of gold and silver ownership, because we know for a fact that for every real physical ounce of gold and silver, I mean, there's lots of figures quoted, but for every ounce, there's multiples, tens of multiples of paper metal that's floating around out there. And the reason is they have to keep the price down is because they have these massive, enormous short positions. I mean, if the price of gold or silver suddenly shot 30% north, these short positions, these banks will be wiped out. They are that massive. I mean, they're enormous, doesn't even come close. And also it's to preserve confidence in the good old king dollar. That's the other reason for constantly smashing the price. So when people say, "Oh, it's because there's gold and silver's just got no value. That's why the price hasn't risen." Well, no, I'm sorry, that's nonsense, and history proves that eloquently. But you don't have to be in either or camp. That's the important part. You can embrace all of it. It doesn't mean you want to invest in all of it or have a stake in all of it. That's your choice. But don't dismiss any of it out of hand, because I think everyone will be missing a very salient point as to the future of the financial world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Paul, we have many things happening with the markets all over the world. The petro yuan is coming to be a real reality. What do you think is going to happen going into 2018? I think there's some big plays, big plays. Also, could you also comment about the 4,200 sealed indictments so far in federal courts and counting, Paul? Huge.
Yeah, the indictments is an interesting. I mean, there's no doubt that a proportion of those indictments will just be sealed not because they're some big household name that we're waiting to see them taken down. There's no doubt that these indictments is part of this draining the swamp process. I think that when they come to pass, how they come to pass remains to be seen. I've always said, you can't just go, well, you and I may know an individual out there who is banged to rights for like 20, 50, 1,000 offences against humanity on so many levels. But proving that and making it stick is an entirely different matter. So, yeah, I don't doubt there's a significant proportion of these indictments, sealed indictments, do relate to certain individuals in this draining swamp process. There are certainly people in the process. There's been people being interviewed for quite a long time. There's people trying to enter plea bargains because the information they can give could indict 50 or 100 other people in the process. That's how the system works. There may be some people who will end up not going to prison, but the information they give could indict 50, as you say, 100, who knows how many people. So whether we like that or not, that's how the world works. And that may be something that to a larger or lesser extent will happen. In terms of events in 2018, I hate to get drawn on timelines, but
yeah,
increasingly I'm beginning to think we may see some major seismic things happening in 2018. There's a sort of conventional wisdom that's now suggesting, whilst we're not going to say that the hammer, the reset will fall today, tomorrow, next week, you're starting to get the impression that it could happen any time going forward, be it next month, in 6 months, in a year, whenever. I don't think it's never time related, it's all event driven, but the events we've seen happen has been huge in terms of financial shift. The petro yuan's a classic one. There's been a big shift towards gold adoption and silver adoption for that matter. There's the whole geopolitical shift. The Middle East being a classic example where Syria is now effectively, to all intents and purposes, is rid of Daesh. We've seen a huge shift more in terms of Turkey's relations with Russia, China. We're beginning to see that shift with Saudi. There's been shifts in terms of Japan away from its vassal state. The US still has problems, but the fact Trump's still the president, despite every attempt to remove him,
yeah,
is probably, and people, for whatever people think has happened, it's multiply that by many factors and many multiples in terms of what's being tried to be done. I think we're starting to see the swamp being drained. There's something we can actually cover to do with Trump and draining the swamp in shortly in terms of and putting some detail on that. So I expect to see big shifts also continuing in Europe, the kind of Merkel type shifts where the European Union moves away from being a Brussels control edict to just European nations trading and cooperating and being sovereign again. That whether all these things happen in 2018 depends on many things, and sometimes the catalyst can be a very small innocuous event that then sets off a whole chain reaction. But I think the dominoes are beginning to line up globally in many respects, which will see the death of the cabal and in totality. But ultimately, it all comes down to that big reset. When you kill the dollar complex, it doesn't matter what money they've got, they're finished, it's game over. But in the process, we're seeing these huge geopolitical shifts. The economic situation really becomes largely irrelevant because they can pump stock markets to where they like.
sure.
The ECB can keep pumping QE into the market. The US can pretend to raise interest rates or not raise interest rates. All these things are largely kind of not really relevant anymore. It doesn't really matter what they say and what they do. But I think central banks and people at that level are now starting to realize the game's up and there's absolutely nothing they can do. Of course, they'll try to do things. They'll try to squirm, wriggle, and keep their system going. But the question is, at what point do they finally give up? And that could also be a big catalyst for when we see gold and silver prices moving, because as much as they've done everything to suppress the price, at some point the question is, are they going to have time to join the party and go, well, we can't keep suppress this anymore? Okay, the consequences will be cataclysmic if they do. What it will do to the dollar, what it will do to their own sort of financial system in essence. But desperation will mean they'll do anything. They could equally panic and go, well, we're not raising interest rates. We're going to have to pump $1 trillion a month into the markets to prop up the banking system. Anything's possible. But of course, all they have to do is wreck and destroy them anyway. They've got no room to maneuver. Whatever they do now, they're dead and buried. The question is, when do they finally accept that? Because there are elements who still don't believe it. Because they simply cannot see a future other than King Dollar. It's beyond their comprehension to imagine the dollar's going to die, and that's going to be the end of their whole way of life and whole way of thinking and acting, not just in terms of US policy, but international policy across the globe, which is fundamentally backed by the dollar. So I guess we might, I mean, normally January time is kind of interesting because we sometimes see some strange shifts in markets. Often it's a time when gold and silver prices start to move. The big question is, will we start to see a movement north? It's entirely possible. We're not just going to go to bed one day, wake up the next and see gold gone to $5,000 an ounce. I just don't conceive that happening, but we may start to see it move. I mean, I'm not one for TA with technical analysis because it's proved time and time again it's irrelevant.
It is.
What will really shift gold and silver north is when the paper market eviscerates, the dollar dies, and that's the end. Then you'll see true price discovery. But you may start to see some movement. And if it gets sort of to 1,400 gold, and then you may start to see some movement north, which may give us some indication. But I know it's very difficult to say because also what's going to happen in terms of the Middle East is there are still some risks, as we said. I think North Korea's largely died a death. I said all along, we would never end up having a war there because the Chinese and the Russians turned to the Americans and said, if North Korea launches a preemptive strike, help yourself, do what you like. We're not going to stop you. But if you launch a preemptive strike on North Korea, we will sink your entire fleet in the South China Sea. And I think the US has paid heed to that. So the risk of wars diminishing on a number of fronts doesn't mean we're out the woods completely. But I think it's just a gradual end to the cabal's globalization. It's more wrecking balls taken to all their political entities in both inside individual countries, and I just think we'll continue to see an acceleration. I think with regards to the US, and maybe this is a good time to kind of lump in the Trump wrecking ball approach. I said that Plan B would come about several months ago, which means you take the wrecking ball out of the Trump administration, and the wrecking ball gets applied externally, which means it can go on with. There are some very powerful brokers in the US. They're not cabal people who want an end to the madness. They want an end to this cesspit or swamp, as Trump referred to it. But the one thing the Trump administration is doing, in essence, it's deconstructing what you might term the administrative state. It's affecting regulatory industries. It's also affecting national security agencies now. I mean, the sort of foreign policy of this America First has been called into question by all these political analysts because they're saying, well, we don't have our commitment to our allies and this international framework and norms, as I said to CJ before we came on, that's kept the US safe and prosperous, as they refer to it, for 70 years. Well, we know that's been utterly detrimental. So the wrecking ball's being taken to that. And in the process, all these American institutions and individuals who must execute this kind of foreign policy are getting undermined. Exactly. They're taking the wrecking ball to that aspect of the administration. And people have accused Trump of making all these comments on Twitter and saying all these things that are so far outside what conventionally is termed responsible presidential conduct. But the thing, what it's done is it's served to undermine the national security agencies. It's taking a wrecking ball to the problems. And the fact is that the world is reaching this kind of breaking point due to instability and economic pressure and all the tensions that existed. Because from the cabal's point of view, the liberal world order that they established and has largely led the US for the last 30 years, maybe longer, and I use liberal in the loosest sense of the word, is in total disarray. Again, that's taking a wrecking ball to it.
Right.
And you keep seeing, whereas the idea is that the US needs all these allies and diplomacy to be, and all these organizations have to be resourced and supported and given the respect. Trump has basically looked at these entities in the US and gone, I've got no respect for you. As far as I'm concerned, you don't serve any purpose. Again, taking the wrecking ball to it. He's proposed cuts in the State Department by, I think, as much as 30%. It's part of taking the wrecking ball to the State Department. Tillerson's going to outsource the management to restructure the department, which apparently has seen loads of these officers inside the State Department resigning in disgust. Well, again, it's taking the wrecking ball to the State Department, which needs a wrecking ball taken to it. The administration is now saying, well, we can't find all the necessary people to serve in the appointed positions because no one wants to work anymore, and the applications for the foreign service positions are down. Well, it's no surprise, because when you take a wrecking ball to it, people's comfort zone's gone. They no longer see the administration working the way it did, which didn't serve the interest of the US people or anywhere else for that matter. And because Tillerson's going to unveil this proposed reorganization, there's all this apprehension that the changes will weaken the role of the State Department and the centralized power. Well, that's good, because that's again taking the wrecking ball. And to the domestic matters and foreign policy for the US, there's also this gigantic belief across the world that Trump's hostile to globalization. Well, yes, he is, but it's globalization under the cabal's rule of thumb, not true globalization. So therefore, once again, that's taking the wrecking ball to it. He backed out of the Paris Climate Accord. He abandoned the TPP. That took years to negotiate. Again, takes the wrecking ball to it. And, there's many of the US closest allies that have now determined they must fend for themselves. This is all by design. It stops the US having to be being financially dependent upon the US to provide all the budget. That's good for the US. And nations, when they're now having to fend for themselves, are looking to natural allies. So Germany, for example, goes, well, we always know our natural ally is Russia. And it's true, if Germany was invaded tomorrow, the first nation who'd rush to their defense would be the Russians.
Right. Right.
And the Germans know that. So this is all by design. Trump's lackluster responses to Russia's apparent interference in elections, which we know is nonsense, has caused the media to foam at the mouth. Apparently, a lot of national security advisors are questioning his leadership and saying he's unfit for office. Well, fine, do it, because we all know it's nonsense. And again, his whole attitude is taking a wrecking ball to that whole aspect of things. So the list goes on and on and on, where people see a lot of his stupidity and his apparent idiotic behavior is by design. And it is taking a wrecking ball to the heart of the Washington Beltway, however you want to refer to it, the Congress, the Senate, etc., where it needs to happen. But it's happening in a way that's starting to have some significant effect. And maybe, obviously, it does tie in to do with the sealed indictments in part. We don't know for definite, but it's likely to. But this has been the process all along. To take a wrecking ball to the cabal interest in the US is incredibly difficult. And as Trump found when he came into power, it wasn't. He thought, oh well, we can easily do things. It was incredibly difficult. Yes, he made some very big errors in judgment. Initially, and to some extent still does with regards to comments about Iran, etc. But we're starting to see some interesting developments. One is the issue with Turkey. Now, obviously, something that's irked the Turks for a long time was that the US was supplying arms to the Syrian Kurdish fighters, which the US admitted. Now, Trump's told Erdogan that the US is going to stop supplying arms to them. And the reason is that the Turkish government considers the group who's the YPG as terrorists. But obviously the US, as they said, has openly armed them in the fight against Daesh. So Trump has clearly stated, apparently he's given instructions that they won't give arms to them anymore. And he also apparently said to Erdogan that the nonsense in the Middle East should have ended a long time ago. What exactly he means by nonsense, we can read into that a myriad of ways. There's been no comment from the White House, the State Department, or the Pentagon on this matter. But there's some US officials claiming, oh, we don't know anything about this. But by all accounts, Trump has spoke to Erdogan. He says He wants to bring peace to the mess that, as he said, he inherited in the Middle East, which has cost the US trillions of dollars in the process, which is factually true. So these are important developments where we're starting to see the US administration adopt a different philosophy and a mindset. The same with the whole Lebanon issue. They've largely stayed out of it and spoken quite eloquently and talked about the need for the sovereignty of a nation to be preserved. These are all encouraging developments. There is some way to go. Iran is still an Achilles heel. It remains one for the Trump administration and Trump, and they need to get over that, much like Saudi needs to get over it as well, because they're being played, because it's the last failed attempt to cause massive disruption in the Middle East, and blame and utilize the specter of Tehran as this state sponsor of terrorism, etc., which of course, as we know, is just simply not true.
Hey V, I think you there, V. Paul, are
No,
you still
don't
there?
worry. Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
He might be muted, or his microphone canceled out. So no, a great show today, Paul. Tons of information for our listeners. I know I jotted down a few notes for things for me to follow up on. Very exciting time to be indeed, to be alive indeed. Do you want to plug any other information or plug your site, Paul, please?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, obviously, just very briefly, there's so much we could talk about we could talk literally for hours and hours. I mean, I had a bunch of topics that we didn't even get around to covering, so that shows the extent of what's going on. But yeah, no, V very kindly kind of plugged the site. We've got the Sirius report, that's SIRIUS.com, that's the website. Yes, there's the premium podcast, it's $4.75 a month, and you get the equivalent. Sometimes we do double podcasts, but you get the equivalent of about 10 to 15 minutes per day of very concentrated information, which I think sometimes even I think it may be a bit too concentrated, because people say I have to listen to it several times because we put that much detail in. But I try to cut the verbiage and just get the factual stuff in. And that events, it's geopolitical, it can be financial as well. It covers a myriad of things. And it's generally things we think are important that need to be stated on, and it's very much reactive to at times to what's going on. Sometimes it's going to be less reactive because there are some points going on that aren't happening in real time, as it were. And yeah, we have the Twitter account and obviously the Facebook group, and they're both the Sirius report. And as ever, we thank Rogue Money for getting us on air. I think the first show we did was around mid-January, and we're very grateful for their exposure, because it's helped us an awful lot to get a bigger audience and people to realize what we're doing. And I think what we do complements the Rogue Money and vice versa, so it works very well. And we're very grateful for the opportunity, and we look forward to doing more into 2018, when I know Rogue Money have got some interesting developments in the pipeline, and that will be of great benefit to them, but also, indirectly to ourselves. So we look forward to, well, not that the year's ended yet, and there's still plenty of, there's a month to go, but we look forward to continuing doing this in 2018.
Very good. Very well said, Paul. It's an honor and a privilege. So I want to thank all our fans for listening in. Paul, thank you so much. Once again, sincerely appreciate it. That closes it out for today's Sirius Report with London Paul. This is V and CJ and Paul, and we're over and out. Take care, everyone.